My next questions are to Eric Lombardi. Thank you so much for coming. You mentioned you had some questions and concerns about the missing middle component of Bill 23 and how it allows 3 homes per property with the municipality still controls the height and the square foot. Do you have specific recommendations on what kind of missing middle housing we should be advocating for in this bill?
Well, for one, you shouldn't depend on the municipalities to do the right thing and allow more space for those properties. In this bill, for a triplex, for example, if you take a bungalow on an existing property built in the 1950s, this bill limits the space that can be built for that triplex to the same area that already exists on the property. Obviously, the economics of doing so basically don't exist, which is why you can't just make something legal for it to work. You also need the rules and regulations to make it feasible in order to work. And we've seen, both from the former mayor and, we've seen, the mayor in here, former mayor, who's even opposed daycares in our own neighborhood. So, leaving it up to the municipalities to do the right thing on this issue, we can't depend on that. The fact that we're here and all the municipalities are failing on this topic essentially means that it has become a provincial issue requiring provincial action. We have 444 kindergartners, and sometimes to get them moving in the right direction, you need to be a little stern, and that's really what the government needs to focus on.
Thank you for that answer. And then the additional question I had is if you could just clarify what your position is on expanding the protected major transit station area zoning. You mentioned that you believe that it should be expanded. Do you have any specific recommendations on that?
Yeah, zoning should be based on the proximity of infrastructure. So a major transit station area is arbitrarily defined at around 500 meters away from the transit station area, with lots of exceptions for other transit station areas. But the areas surrounding these areas are also pretty, have a lot of infrastructure and amenities as well. And so there needs to be transition areas in order to also facilitate the construction of more housing around them. Right now, you're going to get a lot of very tall buildings surrounded by, once again, an ocean of low-rise buildings that is essentially a geographic hallmark to the inequality that we're developing in Ontario.
You mentioned it doesn't go far enough, and so how much further? Specifics?
Yeah, so we need to go dramatically further. Once again, we need to unlock housing in every single neighborhood. We need to allow neighborhoods to grow, right? Like that has to be a cultural change that this group tries to drive, because we're not going to solve this crisis without it. We also need, as we give municipalities housing targets, real teeth to help them enforce it, knowing that they will lose their privileges over planning if they don't meet those targets. California has done this by implementing a builder's remedy. And what this is essentially allowing is municipalities that fail to meet their growth targets lose their permissions over planning to a provincial process for allowing growth. And so municipalities now have an incentive to actually feasibly meet their targets by allowing growth in housing. So this is something I would also suggest.
Sorry, thanks.
Susanna Gaslin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the presenters for your presentation and for your feedback regarding Bill 23. I will start off with Eric Lombardi. Again, thank you, Eric, for that presentation. One of the common things that we've been hearing from especially constitutions is residents from my riding, Scarborough, or last week we went to Brampton, and then we were in Markham. The unaffordability is a main topic that we hear, especially for the next generation, and you yourself coming from a young generation, millennial like myself. We, as a government, we feel like adding more supply is the key to bringing the cost down. And this will definitely help first-time buyers, it will help new Canadians, it will help millennials. And so going forward, like you talked about the accountability, lack of accountability in the municipal sector. So going forward, my question is, what steps would you suggest our government to take further to address the housing crisis?
So one, you have to have a perspective on land economics, right? So this 3 units per household, but no more floor space is obviously just a non-starter for making those projects effective. So what you need to define is a higher floor of what minimums and maximums municipalities are allowed to set for this type of policy to work, right? You really do need to make transit-oriented places a little bit more dense. And I think you guys do need to make more of a case for why additional density in neighborhoods will make places better by potentially even allowing, for example, small retail and investment in third places. But at its fundamental, affordability is going to be based on where you house people and how you move people. And so in the long term, that has to be the focus for the government. And then once again, there has to be consequences for municipalities that deliberately fail. Right? It should really be a strong enough disincentive that they don't foot drag on really meeting the spirit of what the government wants as well. If you don't do those things, they're not going to comply, and then we're not going to get out of this crisis.
Thank you, Eric. I'll pass it to
MPP Pang.
Time do I have, Madam Chair? 5 minutes. Okay, President. So, same question to all three of you. So, as we understand that you have feedback on our Bill 23, that More Home Built Faster Act. This bill takes a bold action to advance our plan to address the housing crisis by building 1.5 million new homes over the 10 years. We are trying to solve all the problems at one time, but we need your input. The proposal, if passed, would help cities, towns, and rural communities grow a mix of ownership and rental house types that meets the needs of all Ontarians, from single-family homes to townhomes and mid-rise apartments. So our plan will build more homes near transit, unlock innovative approaches to design and construction, and and get shovels in the ground faster. But when we work with the municipalities, we are facing a not in my backyard pushback. So I want to hear from all three of you. Can you give me your insight on how we can work with the neighbor that this not in my backyard position can be resolved? How about we start from More Neighbours, Eric?
Yeah, so the main way to address nimbyism is to actually talk to your constituents about why the changes that the government needs to implement are beneficial to them. I think there is this fear among residents that, their neighborhoods are going to be overpopulated, but really we're talking about, particularly when it comes to missing middle rezoning, very mild changes over a long period of time that end up making a lot of impact when you add it all up. So I think that's one way that you can really address nimbyism. But I think the other thing is, help people understand why it also enables them and their kids to be able to, for example, live near them. I think, we focus so much on talking about supply and demand that we don't talk about the human outcomes that will result from having more abundant housing that is more attainable to the median person. I would also suggest that the government just needs to be stronger in leveraging its own land to develop some of this affordable housing in places across the province, right? Because you can also see that when social housing is a major component of the housing mix, it actually moderates the market as well. And so these things can actually complement one another because they provide additional competition. At the end of the day, you want people who are looking for housing to have strength in the market and not the owners of the existing housing if you want to have long-term viability in prices and stability.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Eric?
On rental replacement, it really needs to be preserved. People who are living in older rental buildings are not actually at the problem with the housing crisis. It's really everywhere else. I would also say the government can pursue quick wins, particularly on missing middle zoning, really go beyond 3 units and the existing floor area to really just set floor area minimums that can be set by municipalities. Legalize rooming houses. Really, it's a small win, but it's a small change that is a big win because it is the most affordable market rate ability to rent. These are the critical things that this government could do to really make moves on this issue in the short term. We also don't need a ton of innovative ideas. It just needs to be legal to build buildings out of wood like we used to be able to do, right? This housing is not that complicated. It's the rules that we put in place that are now barriers to building it. So legalize it in every neighborhood and allow the market